Well, it's set to be a busy week as schools are set to reopen on Monday, at least for the grade 4, class 8 and form 4 learners across the country. This was highlighted even as the Ministry of Education gave a raft of guidelines and principles that were set to be followed to ensure the safety of the learners as they resume the academic curriculum. Now, bearing in mind, this is definitely a challenge. On one side, we know education must continue. On the other side, we know of the disruption, especially in the academic calendar that has been caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. A lot of challenges have been pushed to the forefront. Now, in regards to this, let's just have a brief conversation with Julia Mombi-Vitai, who's an education and communications consultant. Many thanks for your time right here on Weekend at 1, especially in a pertinent issue like this. It's an unpopular truth that schools had to reopen on one side, but if I'm to ask parents, they're of the similar opinion that it seems to have been, the responsibility seems to have to be thrusted onto the parents from the government in terms of taking care of the health measures that were put in place and whatsoever. What is your quick reaction in regards to what the Ministry of Education said last week?
First of all, thank you so much for having me. Yes, as you mentioned, my name is Julia Mombi-Vitai. And in the midst of this epidemic, we have obviously seen that schools across not only Africa, but across the world have been closed due to this epidemic. And the role has actually been moved more towards the parents, because we have seen parents become the chefs, they become the disciplinarians. And now with online learning, they've even become the teachers. So now that parents have gone back to work, children's morals, as we can see, are decaying by the day, because as we have seen, there is increased teenage pregnancies. We have also seen increase in drug and abuse amongst teenagers. And with this, education has become the most important fundamental that is actually needed for our children. Education sector right now needs to adapt to what is the term the new normal. And even though schools may seem unprepared to open, this doesn't seem to change by January. And therefore, it is imperative that schools adapt to this new normal in order to monitor the spread of disease amongst these learners. Schools have impending loans. As you have seen, some schools had also taken loans to improve the infrastructure. They had taken loans to also develop their schools in terms of buying new equipment and even buses. So these are some of the challenges that schools are facing. We have also seen loss of revenue from both school staff, teachers who are facing loss of employment, and even throughout the epidemic, they have increased to having very many issues amongst staff. The new normal will definitely include blended learning, which is what we are proposing, because learning will not only take place traditionally, but online learning will also be part of what we are proposing to be part of the new curriculum. Schools will also need to link with health institutions. This means that when schools open, different schools have to actually link with hospitals or health practitioners in order to monitor the situation in the ground. Because when the children go back to class, then they have to be trained on how COVID-19 is spreading amongst them or not spreading. Therefore, measures need to be taken amongst schools.
All right.
There are also to be new policies in order to roll out in terms of including children who have been forgotten, such as children with disabilities, because this new curriculum, when we're talking about online learning or learning in shifts or blended learning, which is actually being implemented amongst other African countries, such as Mozambique, we see that the new policies will need, in terms of CBC, they'll need to actually see how to include children with disabilities and vulnerable children or children who are disadvantaged to go back to school because they don't have the revenues. Sorry?
Briefly, sorry for cutting you short. It's just that you brought up CBC, and I just wanted to highlight the case happening in Kenya. Online learning is a very important fundamental part of the new curriculum, CBC. And it's been a challenge, bearing in mind that's what was supposed to be rolled out, even as students were back at home. How exactly, in terms of policy, would we be able to achieve this?
I think the most important thing is private and public partnership. Because going forward, we no longer need to see different entities in terms of the private doing one thing and the public doing nothing. By this, I mean private schools were able to actually take up online learning, and they were actually able to roll out actually continue teaching their students in terms of CBC. But when we actually look at some of the private public schools, they were not able to continue teaching their students at home. So in terms of now implementing CBC, it actually needs to change in terms of adapting to new and accessible ways. In terms of teachers need to be trained on other methods of actually applying CBC at home, what we call CBC nyumbani, because using other channels such as broadcast media such as the TV, radio, and other live stream medium need to actually be rolled out amongst not only private schools but also public schools, so that CBC can actually be developed and actions. In terms of now CBC nyumbani, we have seen that children who have had at least some form of education in terms of learning throughout the year will be able to have an advantage when they go back to class, because now they can be able to see they can be able to learn. They have actually been able to learn more skills which they're using at home. And that is actually the biggest advantage of CBC.
All right.
Because when children have actually used such skills such as cooking, they have used their home science, agriculture, which are actually some of the new subjects which have been introduced in CBC, they are now able to use such skills at home. So if children were actually taught well during the beginning of the term, then we shall see as they go back to school now, they can even be able to increase the CBC at home. And remember, one other fundamental of CBC is peer-to-peer learning. That is one of the competencies of CBC. And peer-to-peer learning means that children are able to share in terms of their classwork and also their home activity, so that they contribute towards the learning.
All right.
In terms of their classroom.
Now, speaking of contribution, I think one of the things that have come about with the new normal is the importance of the involvement of parents in the day-to-day learning of children. And now, going forward, even as other students are still at home, and I'm sure parents are definitely taking it upon themselves to help impart knowledge, knowing very well that the school calendar might resume next year. How exactly, going forward, should we increase the symbiosis between parents and teachers, as well as schools, institutions, to ensure that the children are definitely benefiting from all sides of the divide?
I think the biggest or the most fundamental issue is that parents were actually at home. So what previously we did not see is that parents were actually during working and did not know a lot about what the children were doing at home. But during the epidemic, parents have now been able to get involved with their children at home, and they've actually taken up more of the teacher's role at home. So going forward, I think one of the fundamental, which I think CBC is also part of, is actually engaging parents more in terms of educating their children when they're still at home. Remember when we even implement, when we open schools coming this Monday, most of the children are at home, because if it is only grade 4 and grade 8, we see the rest of the children are at home. So how do parents actually monitor what the children are doing? They should actually engage in the material which is already being shared by the government through KICD. They should also continue online studies if they have online studies in their schools. And if they don't have any access to this material, we actually suggest that parents take up more roles in terms of maybe splitting the community, so that we can see more involvement in terms of not just letting the children do whatever they are doing at home, but they need actually more monitoring and evaluation, so that to keep up the society in a good place.
All right, speaking of monitoring and evaluation, we well know KCPE, KCSE, as per the new school calendar, is set to be held in March. 11 weeks for the second term, 11 weeks for the third term. It must be a crash course for the teachers and students who are going back to school. And this will be a challenge regardless of the speed or the ability of the students as well. I want to speak to this. What do you think about the examination calendar? Is it enough time, bearing in mind the challenges that will be faced?
I think it's actually not enough time, because as we've had previously, the children have had at least 1 year in class 8 and 1 year in class 4 to actually do their revision. And now that we actually have only 11 weeks in Term 2, which will actually close in December, and 11 weeks in March, it is definitely a shorter period. But that withstanding, I think children have also been revising more at home, and even with their teachers, with online learning, I think, and even with the materials offered through KICD, through radio, through TV, and through the live stream media, I think children have actually taken some time to revise and actually keep up. One other thing I think should be done is the physiological and emotional support when these children go back to school. Because when you're being told you only have a short time of period to do your examination, they need to actually be prepared. They need to be mentally prepared. They need to be emotionally prepared. That is something that I think children need to be trained on. And even the teachers, they need to actually give that support, especially to the children, so that they can build their confidence to actually do this examination.
All right. We definitely appreciate your input right here. Many thanks. That is Julia Mombi-Vitai, who's an education and communications consultant, giving us her take in terms of the schools reopening, some of the challenges set to be faced on Monday going forward, even as we anticipate the resumption of other students next year. Many thanks, Julia. All right, let's take a look at other